Chapter 8. Connection and Compassion. Connection and compassion are not just abstract notions. They are crucial practices during hard times. In this chapter, you will find examples and strategies for applying them when you need them most. Here are the sections of this chapter. Compassionate witness, the power of listening deeply and holding space for people. Perspective, even when I'm 75. Ellen wants to offer the gift of listening well. Scheduling connection, don't leave it to chance. Committing to compassion in advance, being ready to hold our values when provoked. Perspective, those with the least, a story of compassion in hard times. Jane and Skye's living values, these are practical commitments. The illusion of purity, and why seeking purity is a bad idea. Perspective, calling in. Saber is learning to do this rather than calling out. And accepting hypocrisy, a few of my struggles with living my values. Compassionate witness begins with a quote from Brene Brown. We are all worthy of telling our stories and having them heard. We all need to be seen and honored in the same way that we all need to breathe. Compassionate witnessing is a key practice for being the eye of the storm. I love being a compassionate witness for others. I can't count the number of times people have apologized for telling me a burden that was on their hearts or showing me their tears as if this imposed upon me. Quite the opposite. I feel enriched and privileged to be a compassionate witness. On Wednesday nights, a group of activists and community members in my county, many of whom have experienced imprisonment and the threat of deportation, meet for mutual aid in a group called Participatory Defense. They offer support to their neighbors facing deportation or behind bars at the county jail or immigrant detention centers, and to the families of these people. The group cobbles together referrals to free law clinics, accompaniment to court hearings, and a little money for emergencies. They find leads on housing and jobs and offer strategies to navigate the criminal legal system. They often cannot provide the help they wish they could, but they always succeed at doing one thing. They listen. Often at the end of a report from a person whose loved one is in detention, the speaker is in tears. It's so hard. I don't know how we'll get by, but thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. As a transitional pastor, I would step into an existing church and try to become integral to its existing leadership and spiritual care just for a year or two. One sad thing about working as the temp was that people did not always know or trust me well enough to allow me to listen and accompany them in times of trouble. But even an offer to listen has power. At one of my churches, a man had experienced deep setbacks during my time there. He dropped some important commitments and was seldom seen at church. I had left a couple of messages letting him know that I was available to support him, but he never responded. He did show up at my goodbye party and thanked me profusely for my support. I was confused. What support? All I did was leave a voicemail message on his phone. He told me those messages meant so much to me. They were a lifeline. I knew somebody cared. Being a compassionate witness means listening and caring when a person is sharing their story, sharing their heart. A compassionate witness is willing to sit with pain and trouble without trying to minimize it or brush it aside and move to action. For me, compassionate witnessing is a sacred act. I set aside my agenda and make space for someone to be heard, valued, and affirmed in their humanity and dignity. It is sometimes painful, but always beautiful. The person sharing their experience takes a risk. They want to trust that the listener will respect their truth, not judging or dismissing, not correcting, and not shutting down their vulnerable speech by immediately offering fixes or advice. Good listening is far harder to find than good advice. I have participated in a couple of 12-step fellowships running on the same principles as Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm always amazed that a bunch of messed up people can sit together in a room, honestly share their experiences in a simply structured meeting, and find belonging and understanding. So much relief and healing are accomplished by that simple process of listening and being heard. In the Deep Adaptation Forum, compassionate witnessing is encouraged. One person shares what is on their heart with the group, sometimes guided by a discussion prompt. The others are reminded that listening is an active process of receiving the other person with full attention and without interruption. The listener is fully participating as well as the speaker. How is it that we witness each other's pain and come away feeling better? A burden carried alone can crush. A burden heard and acknowledged can become bearable. When I take the role of compassionate witness, I have to believe it's not my job to fix the person I am witnessing, nor to take on their pain. My presence and acceptance of their situation is my gift to them, a powerful acknowledgement of their humanity and value. Occasionally, I do take someone else's pain home. I will need to wrestle with it for a while, figuring out if I have a responsibility to act in some way. The answer is usually no. Then I need to grieve and let it go, because letting it crush my spirit accomplishes nothing. Compassionate witnessing one-on-one is easy to try. Just keep listening attentively. Your body language is enough. You can occasionally reflect back a few words about what you hear in compassionate terms. Reliable compassionate listening in a group requires a container of structured agreements about how you will talk. Here are some groups that use compassionate listening. 12-step groups that take turns giving short, timed shares of experience, strength, and hope, with no feedback, advice, or crosstalk allowed. This strict format teaches people to slow down and listen without commenting. It invites reflection and self-awareness, and it heals. The Way of Counsel from the Ojai Foundation, and the Circle Way, systematized by Christina Baldwin and Anne Linnea, are good formats for compassionate listening. These circles pass the talking stick with some simple guidelines. Those circles are modern adaptations of the council circles shared by many traditional cultures. They last a very long time by the standards of my culture, often hours, sometimes days, and they stood the test of time. In the Deep Adaptation Forum, deep listening is a core practice. Forum gatherings almost always start with a check-in for business meetings as well as support and learning meetings. How are you, really? We're allowed to bring our whole selves to the space. Conversation cafes are another format, simple and easily accessible online from the Liberating Structures menu. This menu also contains other valuable group formats. I hope you have access to groups like this in your life. Who is your compassionate witness? For whom can you be a compassionate witness? Perspective. Even when I'm 75. Ellen lives in New Jersey, United States. She wrote this reflection for the Deep Adaptation private Facebook group. Quote, I was galvanized by watching Joanna Macy, 93, and still speaking, listening, and openly weeping for the earth. I thought, how can I, at 75, say I've done enough? Time for me to rest. The way she did not filter her emotion, but let it hang right out there, moved me in some way I cannot explain. Watching her, I absolutely got our predicament, in my bones, in my sinews, in my organs, in a way that I'd never have, even while all these years that I've been talking about collapse, I thought I had got it. I decided that responding to her invitation is my calling for whatever years I have left. That calls for a big step up for me because my nature is not an organizer, speaker, or initiator. Personal responsibility in this situation means that my discomfort at putting myself out there is not of great consequence. What am I putting myself out there to do? My decision has been informed by Joanna Macy and also by the Women's Mutual Care Circles of the Deep Adaptation Forum. I personally find the experience of deep listening transformative. My observation of other people and hearing what they say leads me to conclude that others also find the practice deeply transformative. My experience and my opinion are that we heal ourselves by listening and being listened to. I can't do anything about collapse, but I can reach out to other humans who are traumatized. Potentially, I can enlarge the circles of humans who try to connect to each other. When we say, as many do, that what remains is to love each other as best we can, that seems to be true for me. We only have to look at the world to see that collapse is not imminent, it's already happening. When a mainstream paper asks, "Has climate change made Southeast Asia uninhabitable?" there's a clue. Collapse is not going to be kumbaya. Some people will try to hold on to what they have, and they will resort to force and violence. So any small way that I can tilt the world toward connection, to awareness of our common humanity, that is my contribution. Scheduling connection. Everyone deserves a good listening to. You can pay a therapist to be your good listener, but compassionate listening does not require an advanced degree, and we need not pay for it. When and with whom do you schedule connection and compassion? I don't leave connections to chance. I schedule connecting calls using phone or Zoom and a few visits with about 7 friends on a weekly to monthly basis. They include a neighbor, a work partner, former colleagues, a spiritual director, and friends in other countries. When I talk to them, I feel understood. I cherish these connections deeply. My empathy buddy and I talk weekly by phone, usually for an hour. We found each other at a nonviolent communication retreat in 2007, and we're still at it. We check in, what's on your mind and heart right now. Then we take turns sharing a situation about which we have unresolved feelings. We receive empathy. We follow the nonviolent communication empathy formula sometimes. Are you feeling ... Are you needing ... We are present to each other as deep listeners, always. My empathy buddy can tell me from across the country and over the phone when I'm not listening with my full attention. She asks me, "Are you distracted?" In this way, she has gently trained me to become aware of my own attention. We have accompanied each other in our work, with family and friends, roommates, personal struggles, you name it. With her gift of empathetic listening, I find myself clearer about a situation, more at peace, and more self-connected. At the start of a call, I often believe I have nothing going on in my life that would benefit from empathy. A little reflection reveals a little something, or a big something. In conversations with other friends, compassion is less structured, yet reliable. If I want more focused, compassionate listening than I'm getting, I might say, "I don't need to problem solve right now. I just need to vent for a few minutes." I have learned by experience that I am better equipped to live my values when I have these conversations regularly instead of pretending that I don't need to process uncomfortable situations. I get busy and distracted. If I waited for the phone to ring, I would seldom talk to these friends. With many of them, I am the scheduler and the reminder. It's worth the trouble. So I schedule and sometimes reschedule recurring meetings, and these precious connections are not left to chance. Committing to compassion in advance. Quote from Brene Brown: "Compassion is not a virtue. It is a commitment. It's not something we have or don't have. It's something we choose to practice." Whatever collapse means in the future, I don't want to find excuses to make enemies of people or groups. I commit to choosing compassion and inviting and empowering others to do the same. Compassion is widely believed to be a weak tea kind of practice. Showing kindness to those who appear to deserve it, and when you enjoy doing so, easy. But reaching out toward those who terrify, repel, or infuriate us at first impulse is a deeply challenging and transformative practice. The most memorable collapse I have witnessed was that of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York in 2001. It was fast and localized, though televised globally and repeatedly. And so symbolic, the demise of U.S. invulnerability. It was a tiny slap in the face of industrial consumer society, but somehow a symbolic collapse of security for the United States. How did the United States respond? My government started 2 wars, the effects of which are still playing out over 20 years later. Scared or unhappy people often behave badly. A stimulus that might not have bothered them in easier times can provoke them to lash out verbally or physically. They would call their behavior defensive, or feeling overwhelmed, they may withdraw and isolate. They may be desperate that someone do something to fix their unease. They may latch on to quick fixes, no matter how absurd or destructive, in an attempt to gain some power, safety, or certainty. Thus the wars in response to the Twin Towers collapse and the rise of political extremism in our time. A person's defensive behavior stimulates the people around them to respond in unhelpful ways because it looks like an attack. So starts a feedback loop of misery, creating more misery. If we keep score of wrongs, the feedback loop spins faster. Each side is furious or resentful, each thinking the other is dead wrong. There's an easy way out. That way is scapegoating. Find a third party no one cares about and must be guilty of something, if only their outsider identity, and hold them responsible. Then we can all feel a kind of cozy togetherness. We can share our disdain for the scapegoat and our common defense from the threat of that scapegoat, real or imagined. For the scapegoat, our defense is an attack. The difficult path is compassion for those who behave badly. Again, the difficult path is compassion for those who behave badly. But they don't deserve it. That's not the point. I want to treat people well because I want to live my values, whether others deserve it or not. I frequently fail at this commitment, but I try, and that makes a difference. You don't have to engage everyone. You can set respectful limits. Discern where your limits are. When you are willing, show compassion. Please do not attempt this unless you really mean it. First, you may have to step away and give yourself plenty of compassion for whatever injury or emotional upheaval you've experienced from their behavior. Don't expect always to be able to practice compassion in the moment for those who threaten you or who trigger a reaction in you. You can commit at least to monitoring your attempts at defense and seeing how they might look like attacks to the person from whom you are defending yourself. Here is an assortment of practices for compassion. 1. Begin by getting in touch with a source of compassion that is real and reliable to you. Compassion is not created out of thin air. It is received from humans and from the non-human world, and then it can be passed on, because the source of compassion never runs out. I picture it as the sacred source of life and love, and I envision it enveloping me in loving and healing energy. You may have a different image. I also remember the people who have inspired me with their commitment to making love real through action. 2. Think or talk through the situation. You can write in a journal or speak with a good listener to explore what happened, how it affected you, and how you might respond. Be honest about your anger or other so-called negative emotions and your judgments of what the person or group is doing wrong. But don't stop there. Take time to realize the needs and values that you cherish that are not being met in the situation. How do you wish things could be different? How can you adapt to what you cannot change? What is in your control right now to further your values and meet your needs? And what is beyond your control so that you can only grieve its lack? For instance, the past cannot be changed. 3. Try guessing stories that account for that person's behavior. Start by assuming it's not about you. Find the basic human needs they were trying to meet when they did what didn't work for you. Even if what they did was outrageous, at the root of their behavior is a universal human need they wanted to meet. 4. Pray or meditate for that person's well-being. Or if that's too much of a leap for you, you could pray for your own peace of mind. One form of prayer for someone I resent is asking for that person to receive the good things I want for myself. 12-steppers are instructed to pray in this way for people against whom they carry resentment, daily for 2 weeks, repeating as necessary. Another option is the Buddhist loving-kindness meditation. This meditation can look something like this. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. The more absurd this approach seems to me, the more I need it. In situations of chaos and fear, seemingly reasonable responses of defense or punishment can take a community into a spiral of disconnection and even violence. To interrupt this spiral, we need to be prepared. We have to commit in advance to act from compassion when our instincts tell us otherwise. Our defenses and reactions almost always make things worse. We can start practicing compassion with people on the street, neighbors, store clerks, and anyone we meet. And we can take courage from the models of oppressed people who have chosen nonviolent direct action instead of violence, including Gandhi, the Standing Rock Water Protectors, Rigoberto Menchu, and hundreds more. Perspective. Those with the least. Author Margie Prideaux, Prideaux, retells a story of practical compassion shared by a friend who survived the Australian Lismore floods of early 2022. In Margie's words, quote, "Water reached the rooftops of 2-story buildings. It was deep, fast-moving, and extremely dangerous. The government was completely negligent. They didn't turn up for 4 days. Most of the rescues were done by the community, in little boats going around just listening for people crying out for help from inside their roofs. When the government did turn up, they made people go through crazy levels of paperwork and didn't come with any food or water. A large area was flooded, and in one township was a First Nations newspaper. These were people who had been to hell and back for generations. They have every reason to just turn their backs on everyone with white skin. Their newspaper building was above the flood point. They ceased the paper and pushed all of the equipment out of the way. They got their community network to bring in water and food and clothes. And then they opened up a drop-in center within about 2 days. They went around in boats and dropped off food and water for people who had stayed in their properties. After the first week, they brought in counselors, doctors, nurses, trauma specialists for children, and more. They used the newspaper's own not-for-profit funds. They set up rooms where you could have a massage, you could have acupuncture. For stress relief, you could see an herbalist. They made the entire building into a rescue and relief center that welcomed everyone. They knew. Their world had been prolonged trauma, so they just immediately knew what people would need. And they kept providing relief for about 4 months with no government funding. They don't want attention. They don't want to do interviews. Amazing. Those with the least sometimes do the most. Perspective. Living our values. In 2012, Jane and Skye wrote this simple list of practical values they planned to live out in their Vermont home with its large garden. Settling in one place, making their home a refuge for others, and sharing food. Things didn't work out as planned, but they were still guided by these values. Living values. Going deeper with stuff that's important. Food. Prep for the future, long-term projects. Settling. Living in one place. Knowing where we are. Others know where we are. Use stability for the greater good. Our friends and neighbors' good, the world's good. Doing stuff with other people. Using our house and land for that. Local is global. Earth is in rough shape. Creative things we do here help out there. What are your living values? Or what might you like them to be? The illusion of purity begins with a quote from Alexis Shotwell. The world is in a terrible mess. It is toxic, irradiated, and full of injustice. Aiming to stand aside from the mess can produce a seemingly satisfying self-righteousness in the scant moments we achieve it. But since it is ultimately impossible, individual purity will always disappoint. Might it be better to understand complexity, and indeed our own complicity in much of what we think of as bad, as fundamental to our lives? The only answer, if we were to have any hope of tackling the past, present, and future of colonialism, disease, pollution, and climate change, is a resounding yes. I invite you to free yourself from the illusion that the right actions can make anyone pure. And see if you can catch yourself before you shun or shame people who are not pure enough. If someone demands that everyone must follow their path, suspect a purity mindset at work. Even if purity were possible in our complex predicament, purity means putting up a wall with a pure on one side and the rest of us on the other. A person seeking purity may not intend to shame, shun, or exclude those who live differently, but it happens regardless of their intentions. If we share a heartfelt desire to live differently, people might be charmed by our eccentric ways of loving people or the planet. If we demand they behave like us, they probably will get turned off by their sense of being judged. Our insistence on purity might occasionally convince someone to join us. More often, we will leave people annoyed and unwilling to listen to us. Someone asked me whether we could mandate the actions needed to save the planet, whatever that means, by having an authoritarian government. Seriously, that's where purity can take us. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from taking action. The same action can be done for any number of reasons. I want to examine my motives and make sure they're not about being pure, right, or above reproach. A good test is, can I befriend someone who doesn't do what I'm doing? Someone who doesn't even understand what I'm doing and doesn't want to hear about it. Here are some choices that can get mixed up in purity and one right way. As I explain them, I feel my judgment landing on those who would be pure. Nobody's perfect. Eating vegan, eating organic, not having children or having fewer children, living without a car or without modern gadgets, without flying or off-grid. Coercive advocacy, not participating in organizations or with people who don't see things exactly the way you do. Let me take them one at a time. Eating vegan. Industrial animal agriculture is almost always land and energy intensive, horrifically polluting, and heartbreakingly inhumane. Advocating to regulate it and refusing to participate in it makes sense. Purity goes further, demands that we all become vegan, and shames us for eating animals. Animals killing animals for food is part of the circle of life, part of the cycle of life, and humans have been hunters or kept food animals in almost every traditional culture. The moral relationship of humans to animals, respecting the gifts of their lives to feed ours, is addressed in many traditional cultures with rituals and expressions of gratitude. There is not one right way. Eating organic. Do you have the money and cooking facilities for such a choice? Lucky you! Are you aware that organic, quote-unquote, is a label with many different regulatory meanings in various legal jurisdictions? Some are more helpful than others. Many small farmers can't afford the certification. Some, quote-unquote, organic pesticides can put people and animals at greater risk than the synthetic substances they replace. Another option that is more work but may have more substance is to shorten the supply chain. This might mean eating locally and developing relationships with growers at farmers markets or through community-supported agriculture, CSAs. This usually means signing up for a box of food each week or two from a local farmer. We can learn how they farm, labels aside, and support them with our food budget. Do have empathy for people who choose the cheapest or fastest food. It's not always much of a choice. There is no one right way. Not having children or having fewer children. Wealthy and well-educated people know they have choices about whether to have children or how many to have. Many people don't have those choices or don't know how to access them. Historically, people have assigned great meaning to children and the legacy they represent. In a society without social safety net, children are your pension. Having several children is only prudent in a society where child death rates are, or have recently been, high. So this kind of purity can easily lead, intentionally or not, to racism and classism. To people with children, purity about not having children sounds like the devaluing of children. When given access to birth control, most women will only have the number of children that they can care for well, not more. Religious restrictions on reproductive health have issues of purity too, and those restrictions infuriate me. There is not one right way. Living without a car, without modern gadgets, without flying, off the grid, ... Opting out of parts of industrial consumer society can be profoundly life-affirming. Many people don't have the awareness, means, or self-will to do that. Can we find ways to change social pressures and government policies to encourage living more simply instead of shunning or shaming people who are engulfed by an addictive system? Meanwhile, we can start a conversation about our offbeat choices. The more I respect a person, the more I find myself emulating them. There is no one right way. Coercive advocacy. Sign up for my political action, support my tech fix, buy my miracle product, or shame on you. Blame yourself for the state of the planet. Take these steps to save the planet, or else. Desperate people can get angry and coercive. A friend who was deeply involved in student civil rights movement in the 1960s told me that the angriest people he ever met were peace activists. It's easy to become like what we hate by fighting it. There is not one right way. Not participating in organizations or with people who don't see things exactly the way you do. This may look like calling out people who are not sufficiently woke, or one of the 100 other criteria. It may look like boycotting elections because neither party is pure enough, avoiding work that's not totally aligned with your values, or shunning people who don't share your values. I am formed by unjust systems and embedded in unjust systems. There is nowhere for me to stand free from participating in oppression. And informed people do disagree about which personal and political choices are the wisest. Loretta J. Ross has advised that if you share about 50% of someone's agenda and values, you are wise to set the rest aside and work with them on the common ground. There is not one right way. Modern people are entangled in life-denying systems. Purity may be an attempt to avoid the crushing guilt that can come from participating in the systems that have created our predicament. Again, modern people are entangled in life-denying systems. Purity may be an attempt to avoid the crushing guilt that can come with participating in the systems that have created our predicament. The alternative to purity is to learn to live with ambiguity and show compassion for ourselves and all the others entangled in those systems. This includes almost everyone I know. We are all human, broken, complicit, and also capable of great compassion and generosity. She concludes with a quote from James Baldwin. Nobody is more dangerous than he who imagines himself pure in heart, for his purity, by definition, is unassailable. Perspective. Calling in. Saber is a student at the University of Pretoria in South Africa and uses they/them pronouns. They value justice for women and people of color in a country that is still profoundly unjust. They want to invite people to become aware of the effects of their words in a gentle and respectful way that they learned from a dear school friend, Kebetswe, nicknamed Kea, K-E-A. Saber knows that when they get defensive about something someone said, the speaker immediately backs off, and the opportunity to make a connection is lost. So when they want to have powerful discussions, they know how important it is to keep their emotions settled. In high school, Kea would challenge Saber's best friend because he didn't respect some people the way Kea wanted. But Kea would always do it in a very kind and helpful way. She practiced calling in instead of calling out. She would say, "Hey, that didn't come across quite right. Maybe say it like this." Since they left school, the friend who was called in has spoken at length about how much he appreciated Kea's gentle invitations to respect. Kay was willing to sit down and have long conversations with him to help him get to a point where he could think differently. The friend now practices Kay's approach to broaching hard topics. These conversations have inspired Sabre to try Kay's approach. Instead of just saying, "No, you can't say that. That's so sexist," or "Don't do that. You're going to kill the environment. Don't eat meat. It's so bad," Sabre will invite people to sit down with them. If the person is willing to have the conversation, it will be calm, friendly, and usually happy and helpful on both sides. Maybe they won't agree on specific points, but Sabre doesn't need to say, "I think you're doing it wrong." They can say, "This is how I go about it, and this is why." Sometimes they change a person's mind, or maybe the person returns to them in a few weeks and says, "I was thinking about that, and actually, I think I agree with you." At the least, it's given that person something to think about. Sabre has used this approach when discussing controversial topics with their mom. Their mom, in turn, reported that she now uses the same approach at work with her colleagues. Sabre notes that interacting in this way seems to have a domino effect, and that adds to its beauty. Those moments of interaction leave them feeling uplifted and hopeful about the future. When the words are kind, calm, and respectful, people are willing to listen, and their minds may be changed. Calling out often feels to the recipient like shaming and rejecting. The term calling in calls from the work of Loretta J. Ross. She uses it to describe the kind of caring conversation Sabre is practicing. Accepting hypocrisy. A quote from Sean Chamberlain. "If no hypocrites were permitted to hold opinions, there would likely be no opinions at all." Michael Dowd, audio editor, speaking. One of my favorite post-Doom conversations of all is with Sean Chamberlain. Connie spent 4 days editing it. It's the only one that has 2 parts because we had a long conversation and it was all great. So if you go to the postdoom.com website, just scroll down and find where you see the 2 players for my post-Doom conversation with Sean Chamberlain. They're both phenomenal. Since none of us are pure, we might as well accept our hypocrisy. I don't enjoy mine, but I'm usually able to laugh at it. Once I get over the illusion of purity, I'm freed to work within my limitations. I have a fraught relationship with a Carolina oak, species undetermined, planted on a rise in the common area behind my backyard. It's about 25 feet high and 40 feet wide, rather rectangular. Its stately canopy shades the only sunny spot in my backyard all winter when my lemon tree and white sage are trying to grow. This oak was chosen by the common area management staff instead of an oak species native to California because California oaks tend to die when overwatered, and overwatering is what California homeowners associations do. This oak is the home of wacky non-native squirrels who happily plant its acorns in my yard. I get dozens of seedlings. In addition to digging up my yard, the squirrels eat the fruit off my trees and taunt my cat. I have to admit, it's entertaining. When one boundless branch of this mighty oak grew horizontally over the wall and into my yard, I got a friend to cut that branch off with a chainsaw. The association manager chewed me out. Well, nothing new there. I'm doing my best to make peace with this oak. It is beautiful, if a couple of thousand miles out of place. It didn't ask to be planted here. It's doing its best to be a stately self. I'm not a native either. That oak is the largest tree on the street. If it weren't behind a wall, it might be an excellent shade tree for lounging in hot weather. Perhaps someday I will put a gate in the wall and set some lawn chairs under its canopy. Perhaps someday I'll be grateful for its acorns. Perhaps someday I will mourn its death when suburban irrigation ends. I have a fraught relationship with my car. I live in endless suburbia, and I have some bad joints that make bicycling iffy, so I hang on to it. Also, I'm lazy. Also, I'm scared of death by automobile, as happens to bicycle riders with disturbing regularity in my community. Most of my car's miles are spent driving to see my mother. There are no buses or trains for the 300 miles from Irvine to Santa Cruz. I could afford an electric car, but could I charge it reliably between here and there? Would I be using much less fossil fuel buying a new car? I know I'm deep in the consumer industrial machine, and I'm not willing to do the work, nor alienate myself from family and friends to try to extract myself much further than the small efforts I'm making. I have a fraught relationship with the environmentalists in my neighborhood. There are many, and they mean well. When my city puts out a call to create block-by-block cool city climate action groups, most of the participants turned out to be my neighbors. They are crusading to replace natural gas home appliances with electric, install solar panels, and more. They might be my people if the organizers didn't need to pretend that it's not too late to fix the climate crisis. After some initial conversations, the organizers and I agreed that I would not be a good fit. I was dubbed Debbie Downer by one trainee. This is not a title I relish, but I have trouble holding my tongue about the naivete and futility of some of their proposed actions. I miss being with them. I meet my kindred spirits online, but people in the flesh come with real advantages. I have chosen not to invest time with them for now, but I want to open my heart to them, whatever I think of their strategies. I questioned one neighbor about the limitations of what the groups were undertaking. Her answer touched me. Quote, "My teenage daughter is asking what we are doing to save the planet. I have to do something for her, with her. I can't do nothing." Unquote. What am I doing for the children, I wonder? Not much. What could I do? I continue to hold that question in my heart. I want to open my heart, live gratefully, generously, and with gratitude. When I do, connection with people and the non-human world matter more, and stuff and striving matter less. My time may be best spent practicing this approach rather than trying not to be a hypocrite. Summary and reflection. Looks like about a dozen bullet points. I'll just pause between each one. Compassionate witnessing is a key practice for being the eye of the storm. This means not fixing or judging, but attending, accepting, and caring. Who is your compassionate witness? For whom can you be a compassionate witness? With Joanna Macy as her inspiration, Ellen is determined to give others the same compassionate listening she has received. You can pay a therapist to be your good listener, but compassionate listening does not require an advanced degree, and we need not pay for it. I do need to schedule it in advance. When and with whom do you schedule connection and compassion? Miserable people often behave badly. Scapegoating makes things worse. Defense looks to the other like an attack, and so begins the downward spiral. Responding compassionately is a commitment we choose in advance of the provocation. I commit to choosing compassion now for when it gets hard, and inviting and empowering others to do the same. I offer 5 practices for getting to a mindset of compassion. A group of Indigenous Australians had every right to be bitter toward the descendants of settlers. Instead, after a disastrous flood, they showed the practical compassion their white neighbors needed. Jane and Skye wrote their living values. What are your living values? Or what might you like them to be? Free yourself of the illusion that your right actions will make you pure, and see if you can catch yourself before you shun or shame people who make choices different from yours. Some topics related to collapse that can get mixed up in purity thinking include eating vegan, eating organic, not having children, living without certain modern conveniences, and coercive advocacy. The alternative to purity is to learn to live with ambiguity and show compassion for ourselves and all the others entangled in life-denying systems. This includes almost everybody I know. Saber is mastering the art of calling in. When the words are calm, kind, and respectful, people are willing to listen, and minds can be changed. I am a hypocrite. I'm not trying to be pure. I'm trying to be generous and grateful, and that's a lot more fun.